That night, my husband walked into our family dinner holding his pregnant mistress's hand and introduced her like a trophy. In front of everyone, he said, "At least she could give me what your daughter couldn't, a child." My mother burst into tears. I froze. And just when he smirked, my father calmly stood up, placed a thick envelope on the table and said, "Before you open your mouth again, maybe you should check who owns the company you work for." That's when my husband went completely pale. What would you have done in my place? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more true stories where karma always finds its way back. I still remember the way the chandelier light shimmered above our dining table that night, soft, golden, almost too perfect for what was about to happen. It was my father's birthday. He'd just turned 65, and my mother wanted the evening to feel peaceful, simple, full of laughter. We'd spent the whole day preparing his favorite dishes, mashed potatoes, grilled salmon, and a chocolate cake that took me hours to frost. I wanted everything to feel normal. I wanted to believe my marriage was still worth showing off. When I heard the front door open, I smiled instinctively. Desmond was late, as usual, but he'd promised to bring a surprise for my dad, a rare bottle of scotch he'd been hunting for weeks. I wiped my hands on the apron, adjusted my dress, and walked out of the kitchen. And that's when I saw her, a woman I had never met, standing beside my husband, holding his arm as if she'd earned it. She was tall, glamorous, with soft curls and a stomach that could only mean one thing: pregnant. My heart stopped. For a second, my brain refused to connect the dots. The only sound in the room was the clock ticking behind my father's chair. Desmond looked at me like a man showing off a prize. He smiled, that smile, the one I used to love. "Everyone," he announced, "this is Vanessa. I thought it was time you all met the woman who's going to make me a father." The words tore through the air like glass shattering. My mother gasped, clutching the edge of the table. My father didn't move. And me? I stood there, frozen, feeling my chest tighten, my throat burning, as if someone had poured ice water down my spine. I wanted to scream, to ask him if this was some kind of cruel joke. But I couldn't speak. I just stared at his hand on her waist and the tiny, satisfied smirk on her lips. Vanessa, his surprise, looked around the room, smiling with a confidence only ignorance could give. "Don't worry," she said softly, resting her hand over her belly. "I know this must be hard for you, but you'll come to understand that life moves on." My mother broke into tears. The knife she had been using to cut the roast slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a dull clang. "Desmond," she whispered, "how could you do this here, in our home?" "In my home," he corrected coldly, pulling out a chair for Vanessa as if we were hosting a dinner guest. He turned to my father, smiling again. "Sir, I didn't mean to cause a scene. I just thought it was time to be honest. Aisha and I have tried for years, but she can't give me what a man needs, a family. Vanessa can. She's 5 months along." Every word felt like a stab wound I couldn't stop bleeding from. I gripped the edge of the table to keep myself from falling. The walls seemed to close in. Even the light from the chandelier felt harsher, almost mocking. I looked at my father. He hadn't said a word yet. He just sat there, his eyes fixed on Desmond. Not angry, not shocked, just studying him. That silence terrified me more than anything, because I knew my father. When he was silent, it meant something was coming. "I'm sorry you had to find out like this," Desmond said, turning to me finally. He looked almost proud. "But this is life, Aisha. Maybe it's time you stop holding me back. Vanessa and I are building a future. You should move on." Something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not visibly, but I felt it. Like a bridge collapsing underwater. I wanted to slap him, to throw the plate across the room, to make him feel what I was feeling. But instead, I whispered the only words I could manage. "Why here, Desmond? Why tonight?" He shrugged. "Because honesty deserves witnesses." The cruelty in that sentence will never leave me. He didn't come to tell me the truth. He came to humiliate me. Vanessa reached for his hand, squeezing it. "Don't be too hard on her," she said sweetly. "She'll understand once the baby arrives." I couldn't breathe. My knees buckled, and for a moment I thought I'd collapse right there. But before I could move, my father's chair scraped softly against the floor. He stood up slowly, adjusted his glasses, and looked straight at Desmond. The entire room fell silent. My father's voice was calm, too calm. "Desmond," he said, "before you open your mouth again, maybe you should check who owns the company you work for." Desmond blinked. What are you talking about?" My father reached into his coat, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on the table. Inside was a document, a set of contracts with a single name on top, Everett Holdings, my father's company, the company that had secretly funded Desmond's career for the past 6 years. My father leaned forward slightly. "Next time you decide to insult my daughter," he said, his voice low and steady, "make sure you're not doing it while eating at the hand that feeds you." Desmond's face went white. Vanessa's hand slipped from his, and I, after all that pain, finally exhaled. For the first time that night, I didn't feel small. I didn't even feel broken. I just felt awake. People say you never notice the moment love dies. They're wrong. You do notice. It's just that you pretend not to. For the first few years of our marriage, Desmond was the kind of husband every woman dreams of. He made coffee for me every morning, left sticky notes on the fridge saying things like, "My lucky charm," or "We're unstoppable, babe." He used to hold me from behind whenever I cooked, whispering stupid jokes that made me spill salt all over the counter. We didn't have much back then, but we had us. And I thought that was enough. Then came the conversations about children. At first they were gentle, half jokes over dinner, daydreams about a boy with his smile or a girl with my eyes. But after 2 years of trying, the laughter in those conversations started to fade. The doctor visits turned from hopeful to humiliating. Tests, pills, injections, schedules. Every month became a new reminder of what I couldn't give him. I remember the day the specialist sat us down. She spoke softly, carefully, as if wrapping her words in silk. "There's no medical reason you can't conceive," she said, looking at me. "Sometimes stress, timing, lifestyle, it takes patience." But when we walked out of that office, Desmond didn't say a word. He just walked 3 steps ahead of me, his silence heavier than any diagnosis. That silence became our new language. He stopped holding my hand in public. He stopped calling me honey, stopped asking about my day. At night, he started sleeping with his back to me. Sometimes when I turned off the lights, I'd whisper "good night," just to hear if he'd still say it back. He never did. Then came the first comment, the kind that cuts deeper than it sounds. One morning while we were getting ready for work, he said, "Maybe if you spent less time worrying about your career, your body would cooperate." It wasn't a fight. It was colder than that, just a fact, tossed like a knife over his shoulder. And that knife stayed lodged in me. The months that followed were a slow decay. He began coming home late, first once a week, then almost every night. He'd smell of expensive perfume that wasn't mine. When I asked, he'd laugh. "You're being paranoid, Aisha. Don't turn into one of those desperate wives." I tried to believe him. I tried to be the calm, rational wife who keeps the home standing while the storm rages outside. But something in me was already breaking. One night I stayed up waiting. It was 2 a.m. when he finally came home. His shirt was half buttoned, his tie missing. When I asked where he'd been, he sighed and said, "Work dinner. Stop making everything dramatic." Then he went straight to the shower. While he was in there, his phone buzzed on the table. A message lit up the screen. "You left your cufflinks here. Baby's kicking again." My chest went cold. My hands trembled so badly I could barely breathe. When he came out, I confronted him. He didn't even look guilty. He just stared at me and said, "So now you're snooping through my phone?" That was the night I realized I wasn't his wife anymore. I was an obstacle. After that, he didn't hide it. Late nights became whole weekends away on business. He changed his passwords, his tone, Even the way he said my name, like it was a chore. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Every time I saw a pregnant woman on the street, it felt like the world was mocking me. One Sunday, I went to church alone. I remember kneeling there, praying not for a baby, but for peace, for strength to stop hating myself. Because that's what infertility does, it turns love into shame. And I was drowning in it. My mother noticed the change before anyone else. One afternoon, she came by unannounced, found me sitting on the kitchen floor with the oven timer still beeping. She didn't ask questions. She just hugged me and said, "Don't let him define your worth, Aisha." I nodded, but I didn't believe her. At that point, Desmond's opinion was the only mirror I looked into, and it reflected nothing but failure. Then came the whispers. My co-workers started avoiding eye contact. Someone slipped and mentioned seeing Desmond at a restaurant with a younger woman. When I asked him about it, he smirked. "You're losing it, Aisha. Maybe talk to a therapist instead of accusing me." He said it so smoothly that for a moment I wondered if I was the problem. If I had imagined the text, the perfume, the distance. That's what emotional abuse does. It rewires your reality until you doubt your own pain. The final crack came a week before my father's birthday. Desmond came home with a new watch and an arrogance I hadn't seen before. He looked at me over dinner and said, "My life's moving forward, Aisha. You should find something to fill yours." When I asked what that meant, he just smiled. And in that smile I saw it, the truth I had been avoiding. He was done pretending. He wanted me to see her. Still, I clung to denial. I spent the next week planning my father's birthday dinner, baking, decorating, pretending everything was fine. Because if I could just make that night perfect, if I could make him proud again, maybe I could win him back. But love built on humiliation can't be saved. It can only collapse. And that's exactly what happened when he walked in that night, holding her hand. The night I found out the truth, the world didn't explode. It just cracked, quietly, cruelly. Desmond had been distant for weeks. He said he was working on a new construction project, something big. He started dressing better, shaving more often, wearing cologne I'd never smelled before. When I asked, he said, "Presentation matters, Aisha. You wouldn't understand." That should have been my first clue. But love blinds you, not with light, but with excuses. One Friday evening, I decided to surprise him at work. It was something I used to do back when things were good. Bring him coffee, chat with his assistant, wait for him to finish. That day, the receptionist gave me a puzzled look when I arrived. "Mr. Hayes isn't here," she said. "He left an hour ago with Miss Jenkins." "Miss Jenkins?" I repeated, my stomach tightening. "His project manager," she added quickly, realizing too late that I hadn't known. She tried to smile it off, but I could already feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I drove home faster than I should have. His car wasn't there. I sat in the driveway watching the shadows stretch across the porch, hoping, no, begging, for him to come home alone. At 9:30 p.m, headlights swept across the window. My breath caught. He walked in wearing the same confident smile I used to fall for. "Where were you?" I asked softly. "Work dinner," he said, loosening his tie. "With Vanessa Jenkins?" He froze for half a second, just enough to confirm everything. Then he laughed. "So now you're checking up on me at the office? God, Aisha, that's pathetic." "Are you sleeping with her?" The words came out smaller than I meant them to, like they were afraid of the air. He looked me straight in the eye. "Yes. And before you ask, yes, she's pregnant." It was the kind of pain that doesn't make you cry. It just hollows you out. I think he expected me to scream, to throw something, to fall apart. But I didn't. I stood perfectly still, gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles went white. "You don't even look surprised," he said. "Maybe you already knew this was coming. You've been holding me back for years, Aisha. You don't inspire me anymore. You don't even look alive." I wanted to slap him, but I didn't. I just whispered, "Does she know you're married?" He smirked. "Of course. She's not a fool. She knows what she's getting. A man who wants a real family." I could feel something sharp tearing through my chest, but I managed to ask, And what am I then? He shrugged. You were the right woman for a time, the stable phase, the respectable wife, but you stopped being enough. That sentence echoed in my head for days. You stopped being enough. He grabbed his jacket and left before I could respond. The front door clicked shut with a finality that felt like a tomb ceiling. The silence afterward was deafening. No footsteps, no apology, just the sound of my heartbeat and the clock ticking, counting down the end of us. I sat on the floor for hours staring at the door, half expecting him to come back. He didn't. When dawn came, I was still in the same spot. My phone buzzed. It was a text from him. Don't make this dramatic, Aisha. You'll always have a place in my life, just not the same one. That morning, something in me died. For the next few days, I moved through the house like a ghost. His clothes still hung in the closet. His cologne lingered in the air. But everything felt tainted. Even the walls seemed to whisper his betrayal. Then, a few nights later, I got an invitation in my email. It was from him. Subject: dinner at your parents' place. The message read, don't be late. It's time we all face the truth. I'm bringing Vanessa. At first I thought it was a joke, but the more I stared at the screen, the more I realized he meant it. He was going to walk into my parents' home with her and humiliate me publicly. Like he wanted to erase the last ounce of dignity I had left. I deleted the email. Then I sat there trembling, staring at the reflection of my own face in the laptop screen, pale, hollow, unrecognizable. I had two choices, run or endure. And somehow I chose to endure. The day of the dinner, I went to my parents' house early. I helped my mother set the table, pretending everything was fine. She noticed the bruise on my wrist where I'd accidentally hit the counter days earlier. She didn't ask. She just looked at me and said, whatever happens tonight, remember who you are. I nodded, but inside, I felt like no one. As the evening approached, I kept checking my phone, half hoping he'd change his mind. He didn't. At exactly 7, his car pulled into the driveway. I saw the headlights from the window. And then I saw her, Vanessa, stepping out in a sleek white dress, her hand resting gently on her round belly. I remember thinking how cruel the universe can be, how it could let someone carry life inside her while killing another woman's spirit at the same time. When the doorbell rang, I felt my mother's hand squeeze mine under the table. Stay calm, she whispered. Your father's here. And thank God he was, because if my father hadn't been in that room, I might have broken that night. I can still see the scene in flashes, the sound of Desmond's voice announcing his big news, my mother's soft sobs, Vanessa's smug smile, and then my father's silence, heavy, terrifying, deliberate. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam his fist on the table. He just waited, watched Desmond dig his own grave with every arrogant word. That was the longest dinner of my life. Every minute felt like a blade twisting deeper into me. But something strange happened toward the end. In between the humiliation, the shame, and the rage, something inside me began to cool, a stillness I couldn't explain. It was the first flicker of calm after the storm. And I didn't know it yet, but that calm was the start of something powerful. The moment when pain began to turn into strength. The smell of roasted turkey still reminds me of that night. Sweet, warm, and heavy, like comfort twisted into a weapon. The house looked beautiful. Candles flickered across the tablecloth. My mother's silverware gleamed. Soft jazz played from the old speaker in the corner. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt wrong. I had spent the entire afternoon pretending, smiling, cooking, arranging flowers, pretending I didn't know the man I married was bringing another woman into this house, pretending I could survive it. My father sat at the head of the table, glasses low on his nose as he scrolled through something on his phone. He looked peaceful, too peaceful. My mother fussed over the gravy, humming a tune that cracked every few notes. I could tell she was forcing it, the way mothers do when they already know their child's heart is about to break. When the doorbell rang, no one moved for a moment. The sound sliced through the air like a blade. Then my mother whispered, "I'll get it." But my father stopped her with a single glance. He set his phone down, folded his hands, and said calmly, "Let them come in." The front door opened, and there he was, Desmond, in his best suit, grinning like he owned the world. Beside him, Vanessa shimmered in pale gold, her hair glossy, her hand cradling the curve of her stomach like a prize. My stomach twisted, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. "Good evening, everyone," Desmond announced, stepping inside as if nothing was wrong. He leaned down to kiss my cheek. I turned slightly so his lips brushed the air instead. He smirked, the kind of smirk that said he liked the game. He guided Vanessa to the chair right next to mine. "My wife," he said with a mock toast, "has always been the perfect hostess. I knew she'd make tonight special." My mother's eyes were red already. Vanessa smiled politely. "You have such a lovely home, Mrs. Everett," she said softly. "It's so full of family warmth." Her voice dripped with irony. I wondered if she practiced it in the mirror. The first half of dinner was unbearable. Desmond talked non-stop, about business, about new beginnings, about how life rewards those who aren't afraid to take chances. He was performing like an actor desperate for applause, and every sentence was a dig at me. "Some people," he said at one point, swirling his wine, "are content living small lives. Others take risks and build something bigger." He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. The room understood exactly who he meant. My father listened quietly, his face unreadable. But I saw it, the subtle clench of his jaw, the flicker in his eyes. He was waiting. Desmond went on, bragging about the upcoming expansion of his firm, the investors lining up to work with him. He had no idea that the biggest investor sitting at that table was my father. Vanessa laughed lightly, brushing her hair behind her ear. She placed a hand on her belly and said, "We're thinking of naming the baby after Desmond's grandfather. He was such a strong man, right, honey?" Desmond smiled proudly. He sure was. Then, without warning, he turned toward my father. "Sir, I wanted to thank you again for your support. Aisha always said you believed in me. I hope to keep making you proud." My father didn't respond. He just lifted his glass, sipped, and set it down. The silence after that was louder than any words. Desmond turned to me instead, his tone sharp enough to cut. "Maybe someday," he said, "Aisha will understand what it means to give a man legacy." It was such a simple sentence, but it ripped through me. Legacy. That's what I had failed to give him. A legacy, a name, a child. And now he was building one with someone else right in front of me. I tried to steady my breathing, to remind myself that I had promised not to cry. But when Vanessa reached across the table and touched his hand, whispering, "Our baby's kicking again," I felt my throat close. My mother dropped her fork. The clatter echoed through the silence. Desmond laughed. "Guess he's excited to meet his grandfather, huh?" He looked straight at my father, smiling wide. The arrogance was blinding. My father's eyes flicked to me, then to Desmond. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence was its own kind of warning. My mother tried to change the subject, asking if anyone wanted more wine. But Desmond didn't stop. He leaned back in his chair, completely at ease, savoring every second of my humiliation. "You know," he said, swirling his glass, "Aisha always wanted to keep our struggles private. But I think hiding the truth only makes it worse. Sometimes you have to admit when something's empty." The word empty hit me like a bullet. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. Everyone at the table understood. Vanessa gave a soft laugh. "Desmond," she said teasingly, "don't be cruel." But the damage was done. My hands trembled under the table. I clenched them until my nails dug into my palms. The sting helped me stay upright. My mother whispered, "Aisha, sweetie, you don't have to sit through this." But I shook my head. "No, Mum," I said quietly. "I do. Because if I left now, he'd win. He'd have the story he wanted, the weak wife who couldn't face the truth." So I sat there, staring at the candle flames dancing on the table, pretending not to feel the tears burning behind my eyes. Pretending I couldn't hear my own heartbeat pounding louder than his voice. Desmond chuckled again, leaning back, satisfied. He thought he'd broken me. But the funny thing about people like him is that they always talk too much. They always forget who's really listening. My father reached for his napkin, dabbed the corner of his mouth, and said calmly, "Desmond, I think you've said enough." Desmond smiled, oblivious. "Oh, not at all, sir. I just want to be honest with your daughter. It's better to face reality than live in denial, right?" My father's eyes hardened. "Reality," he repeated softly. He picked up his glass, swirling the wine as if deep in thought. Interesting word. The room went still. Even Vanessa sensed the shift. And that's when I felt it. That sudden quiet before a storm, the kind where the air grows heavy and every instinct tells you something big is about to happen. Desmond didn't see it. He just kept talking. He didn't know that in less than a minute, the entire table and his entire life was about to turn upside down. My father placed his napkin neatly beside his plate, as if he'd simply finished a normal meal. He took a slow breath, his voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the room. "Desmond," he said, "you talk about honesty and reality, but there's one thing you haven't faced yet." Desmond leaned back, smirking. "And what's that, sir?" My father reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick brown envelope. He set it down in front of him, the sound heavy, final. The candlelight flickered across his glasses as he said quietly, "You've been bragging about your company, your expansion, your investors. I think it's time you take a good look at who you actually work for." Desmond blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" My father slid the envelope across the table. "Go ahead, open it." Desmond hesitated, glancing at me, then back at him. He tore it open. Inside were several documents, official contracts, bank transfers, and a single letterhead that made the blood drain from his face. Everett Holdings, my father's company. He stared at the papers, his hands starting to tremble. My father's tone never changed. It was steady, deliberate, the voice of a man who never needed to shout to command fear. "You've been working under a subsidiary of Everett Holdings for 5 years, the one that funded your firm, approved your loans, and paid your contractors. Every paycheck you've ever signed," he paused, leaning forward slightly, "was signed because I approved it." The colour left Desmond's face. He looked at Vanessa, then back at my father. "That's impossible. My company's independent. We have investors, partners." My father raised an eyebrow. "Yes, and who do you think your partners are? You never checked the full ownership records, did you? I did that on purpose. I wanted to see what kind of man my daughter married." The silence was absolute. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. Desmond swallowed hard. You've been watching me?" My father nodded once. "From the moment you asked for her hand, I saw potential in you. You were ambitious, determined. I thought maybe, with the right guidance, you'd grow into a decent man." He leaned back, his eyes cold now. "But I was wrong." Desmond's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked around the table, desperate for someone to save him. Vanessa sat stiff, her confidence draining as she realized the air in the room had turned against them. My father's voice lowered. "You humiliate my daughter under my roof, on my birthday, with your mistress by your side, while living off the company that I built?" He let out a dry laugh. "You wanted honesty, son. Here it is." He turned toward me, his tone softening for the first time that night. "Aisha, sweetheart, I didn't tell you sooner because I wanted you to choose your own life. But make no mistake, this man has been thriving off the Everett name for years." I stared at the documents, my heart racing. I had no idea. My father had never mentioned any of this. He had quietly protected me from behind the scenes, even when I thought I was completely alone. Desmond pushed his chair back suddenly, his voice cracking. "You can't do this. You can't just take away everything I've built." My father stood. He wasn't a tall man, but when he rose, The entire room seemed to shrink. "I'm not taking anything," he said evenly. "I'm just reclaiming what was never yours." He pulled another paper from the envelope, a letter of termination, signed that morning. "Effective immediately, your contract with all Everett subsidiaries is dissolved. You'll receive no severance. The board has already been informed." Vanessa gasped. "What? You can't just ruin him like this?" My father's eyes shifted to her, cold, assessing. "Young lady, you should choose your company more wisely, because as of tonight, the man beside you doesn't have one." Desmond's breath came fast, uneven. "This is revenge." "No," my father interrupted, voice like steel. "This is consequence." The weight of that word filled the room. Consequence. It hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My mother reached for my hand under the table. She didn't say a word, but I felt her trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from relief. Desmond stood frozen, eyes darting between my father and me. For the first time in years, he looked small. All the arrogance, the charm, the power, it evaporated. "I suggest you leave," my father said finally, "before I have security escort you out." Vanessa looked at him, horrified. "Desmond, let's go." But he couldn't move. His pride wouldn't let him. He turned toward me, face twisted with something between anger and humiliation. "This isn't over, Aisha," he hissed. "You'll regret this." I met his eyes calmly. "For once, Desmond," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not the one who's afraid anymore." He stared at me for a moment, then turned sharply and stormed toward the door. Vanessa followed, her heels clacking nervously against the floor. When the door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoed through the house like thunder. The silence that followed was peaceful, the kind that comes only after a storm has passed. My mother exhaled shakily and started clearing the plates, muttering something about reheating dessert. My father sat down slowly, folding his hands again as if nothing had happened. I looked at him, still stunned. "You knew. All this time, you knew." He gave me a small, weary smile. "A father always knows when his daughter is being mistreated. I just needed you to see your worth before I stepped in." That was the moment I broke, not from pain, but from the relief of being seen. The tears came quietly, unstoppable. He reached over, placed his hand over mine and said softly, "Now, Aisha, it's time you stop surviving and start living." For the first time in years, I believed him, and for the first time that night, I felt free. The morning after the dinner, the house felt too quiet. Even the ticking of the old clock sounded different, like it was counting down to a new life I hadn't chosen yet. I woke up on the couch, still in the same dress from the night before. My makeup had smudged, and my throat felt raw from holding back everything I wanted to scream. For the first time in years, I didn't check my phone for his messages. There was nothing left to read. My mother tiptoed around me that morning, speaking softly, like noise might break me. She made tea, the way she used to when I was a little girl after a nightmare. When she set the cup in front of me, her hand lingered on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," she whispered. I nodded, but I didn't feel brave. I felt empty, like someone had turned off the gravity inside me and I was just floating in the wreckage. Later that day, my father came home from the office. He didn't mention the dinner. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes said enough. He sat across from me and quietly placed a folder on the coffee table. Inside were papers, bank transfers, legal notices, and a single document with my name at the top. Transfer of ownership. "I want you to take this," he said. "These are the shares I've held in Desmond's company. They're yours now." I blinked. "Dad, I don't want his—" He interrupted gently. "It's not his, Aisha. It never was. You've earned the right to decide what happens next." I stared at the document. It felt heavy, not just with numbers, but with history, with every insult, every humiliation, every tear I'd swallowed to keep the peace. "I don't want to destroy him," I said quietly. I just want to stop hurting. My father smiled faintly. That's how you know you're healing. Days passed. News travels fast in small towns. By the end of the week, everyone knew what had happened. Desmond's name started popping up in whispers, his company collapsing, clients pulling out, rumors of financial fraud. I didn't ask for updates, but they found me anyway. One afternoon, my former colleague from the firm called. "Aisha, you won't believe this," she said. "The board suspended Desmond. Apparently your dad pulled every contract. They found things in the accounts. Shady deals, fake invoices." I didn't say a word. I just listened to the sound of karma doing its work. That night, Desmond showed up at my parents' house. It was raining hard, thunder shaking the windows. My mother peeked through the curtain and gasped, "Aisha, it's him." He was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his once perfect suit clinging to him like a ghost of his arrogance. I hesitated before opening the door, but something inside me, curiosity, maybe pity, made me do it. He looked different, smaller. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I didn't move. "Why?" "I need to talk to you." I crossed my arms. "We did all our talking last night." He flinched. Rain dripped from his chin. "Please, Aisha, everything's falling apart. They're investigating me. I don't know what to do." For a long moment, I just watched him, this man who once towered over me, who used to make me feel small. Now he was shaking, desperate, the mask finally gone. "Do you remember," I said softly, "when I begged you to talk to me? When I asked you to let me in and you laughed?" He swallowed hard. "I made mistakes. I was angry. You have to believe me. Vanessa, she left. Took everything. I have nothing left." I stepped aside just enough for the porch light to hit his face. It was pale, haunted. The same look he had when my father revealed the truth. "I don't hate you, Desmond," I said quietly. He looked startled. "You don't?" "No," I said, "because hate still means I care. And I don't, not anymore." He tried to reach for my hand, but I stepped back. "Please, Aisha," he whispered. "I just need help. A place to stay. Maybe, just until I fix this." I almost laughed. Not cruelly, but out of disbelief. Even now, he thought I'd save him. Even after everything, he still saw me as the soft place to land. "You're right about one thing," I said. "Life does reward those who take risks. You risked everything for your ego. Now you get your reward." He stared at me, eyes glistening, not with tears, but with humiliation. Then he turned, walking back into the rain without another word. The sound of the storm swallowed him whole. When the door closed behind him, I finally exhaled. My mother hugged me tight, whispering, "It's over." But I shook my head. "No, Mom, it's beginning." The weeks that followed felt like walking barefoot on broken glass, painful but necessary. I spent days helping my father's legal team unwind the contracts Desmond had forged. Nights were quieter. Lonelier, yes, but peaceful in a way I'd forgotten peace could feel. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. At first, the pages were full of anger, but slowly they began to fill with something else. Gratitude, relief, even a strange kind of freedom. One evening, my father joined me on the porch. The sunset painted the sky in gold and lilac. He handed me a cup of coffee and said, "You know, when your mother and I married, I was broke. But she stood by me. We built everything together. That's why what Desmond did, it wasn't just cruel, it was cowardly." I nodded. "I used to think strength meant holding on." My father smiled softly. "Sometimes it means letting go before you drown." That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because I'd forgiven him yet, but because I finally forgave myself for staying too long, for trying too hard, for forgetting who I was. The next morning, I woke up early, packed a suitcase, and told my parents I was moving out. Not far,
just to a small apartment downtown. It was time to start over, on my own terms. As I stood at the door, my mother handed me a small silver keychain shaped like a star. "For luck," she said. "You deserve new light." I smiled. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like pretending. Starting over was nothing like I imagined. It wasn't cinematic or triumphant. It was quiet, like walking through ashes after the fire had already burned everything down. But the quiet was mine. My new apartment was small, one bedroom, a crooked window that creaked every time the wind blew, and walls painted the wrong shade of white. But for the first time in years, it felt like home. No perfume that wasn't mine, no footsteps pacing in anger, just me, and silence that didn't hurt anymore. I found work at a small community arts centre downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me space to breathe. Most days, I helped organise charity events or assisted with small theatre productions. Being surrounded by people who created something beautiful from nothing, it reminded me that rebuilding didn't have to mean revenge. Sometimes it just meant rediscovering your rhythm. Still, I couldn't escape the whispers about Desmond. Every headline seemed to mention him. Hayes Construction under investigation. CEO faces financial collapse. Even my co-workers whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. At first, the thought of his downfall made me sick. Not because I pitied him, but because part of me still hated that his name and mine were tangled together in every story. I wanted to be free of him completely. One morning, my father called. He sounded calm, but I could hear the weight in his voice. "They're filing charges," he said. "Fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. It's worse than I thought." I didn't know what to say. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. "Do you want me to testify?" I asked. He hesitated. "Only if you want to." And for the first time in months, I realised I didn't. Desmond's punishment didn't need my voice. His own choices had already spoken loud enough. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and wrote in my journal, "I don't want revenge, I want peace, and maybe purpose." It was the first time the word purpose had appeared in my handwriting since the divorce. A few weeks later, I got a call from a woman named Claire, the director of a regional nonprofit theatre group. She'd seen my work organising charity galas and wanted to invite me to join as a creative consultant for their next play. "Your background in psychology and communication could be really helpful," she said. "Plus, we could use someone who understands emotion." Emotion. If only she knew. I accepted. The first rehearsal was messy, actors forgetting lines, lights flickering, chaos everywhere. And yet, when I stood at the back of the theatre watching them breathe life into the story, something inside me stirred. It felt familiar, like a version of myself I'd buried long ago was waking up again. When rehearsal ended, the director, a man named Caleb Stone, walked up to me. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of quiet confidence that didn't demand attention, but earned it anyway. "You used to perform, didn't you?" he asked. I blinked. "How do you know?" "The way you watch," he said simply. "People who've been on stage don't just look. They feel every mistake, every silence. You miss it." I opened my mouth to deny it, but couldn't. He was right. Before Desmond, before the marriage, before the word infertile became the only label that mattered, I'd loved performing. I used to act in college plays, and for a brief time, I believed I could move people with my voice. But I gave it up when I married Desmond. He'd called it a childish hobby. That night, I went home and found my old box of scripts, dusty, wrinkled, but still there, like little ghosts of who I used to be. I spent hours reading lines aloud in front of the mirror. At first, my voice cracked. I forgot the rhythm, the breathing. But as the night went on, the words began to flow again. And for the first time in years, I didn't hear Desmond's voice in my head. I heard my own. A month later, Claire convinced me to audition for a small role. "Just for fun," she said. I hesitated, terrified of failing again. But when I stepped onto that empty stage and looked out into the dark rows of seats, something shifted. The lights were warm, the air was still. And in that silence, I felt alive again. I read the lines from memory, words about heartbreak and forgiveness, words that felt carved from my own story. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then Caleb from the back row said softly, "That was real." I didn't get the lead role, but I got something better, respect, a place to belong again. Weeks turned into months. The play opened to small crowds, but each performance felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. After every show, someone from the audience would stop me and say, "Your eyes, you looked like you were living it." And I was, because every word I said on stage was another truth I'd finally learned to speak. One night, as the curtain fell, I glanced into the audience, and for a second I swore I saw him, Desmond, sitting in the back, watching me. Maybe it was my imagination, maybe it wasn't, but I didn't look away. I just held my head high, bowed, and walked off stage. In the dressing room mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she finally felt different. There was strength in her smile, calm in her eyes, and a softness that wasn't weakness, it was peace. For the first time since everything fell apart, I knew one thing for certain. I didn't just survive Desmond, I outgrew him. The night after our final performance, the theatre was packed. Every seat was taken, every face turned toward the stage. I could feel the heat of the lights on my skin, the hum of anticipation vibrating through the floorboards. And when the curtain fell, the applause was deafening. I bowed, smiling, not for them, but for me. For the woman who had once believed her worth depended on someone else's approval. For the girl who'd stopped recognizing her own reflection and somehow found her way back. After the show, the cast celebrated at a small diner nearby. Laughter, music, cheap champagne, it all felt light, easy. When I finally stepped outside to go home, the city was alive with rain, thin streaks of silver under the streetlights. That's when I saw him, Desmond, standing across the street, drenched, like a ghost caught between guilt and regret. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Neither of us moved. Then he crossed the street, slowly, cautiously, as if approaching someone sacred or dangerous. "You were incredible," he said. His voice was soft, almost broken. "I didn't know you could perform," I interrupted. "I used to, until you made me believe it wasn't worth it." He winced, glancing at the ground. "I deserved that." "You deserved worse," I said quietly. "But life seems to be doing that for me." He nodded, a hollow laugh escaping him. "Yeah, life's been generous with its lessons." His voice cracked on the word lessons. There was no arrogance left in him, no confidence, no charm, just exhaustion. The sharp, prideful man who once humiliated me in front of my parents was gone. What stood before me was what remained when ego burns away, ashes. He rubbed his temples. "They're taking everything, Aisha. The company, the house, even the car. My accounts are frozen. I might go to prison." He laughed bitterly. "You know what's funny? The only person who hasn't turned their back on me is the one I least deserve to face." I didn't answer. The rain was cold, but it felt cleansing. He looked at me again. "You're happy, aren't you?" "Yes," I said simply, "because I stopped waiting for you to change." For a long time he said nothing. Then he whispered, "Do you ever miss us?" I took a deep breath. "Sometimes I miss who I thought we were, but I never miss who you became." His eyes glistened. "I don't sleep, you know. I keep replaying that night, your father, that dinner, the look on your face. I thought I was winning, but I was losing everything that mattered. I could have said 1,000 things, but instead I whispered, 'We always lose what we take for granted.'" He exhaled, defeated. "Do you think people like me ever get redemption?" "Maybe," I said, "but it's not something you ask for. It's something you earn, by facing the mirror, not by begging others to forgive you." He nodded slowly,
eyes downcast. Vanessa left. She took the baby. I don't even know where they are. The words hung between us, heavy, almost cruel, and for the first time I didn't feel pity. I felt nothing.
Because life had already done what I could never do. It had made him see. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice trembling, "for everything." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that the man standing in front of me wasn't my enemy anymore. He was just a broken chapter in a book I'd already finished reading. "I forgive you," I said softly. His head snapped up, eyes wide. "You... what?" "I forgive you," I repeated, "but not for you, for me." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Because carrying anger keeps me tied to you, and I'm done carrying anything that heavy." He stared at me like he wanted to say something, but no words came. The rain fell harder now, washing away the last traces of our past. Finally, I turned to leave. "Goodbye, Desmond." He didn't stop me. He just stood there, watching as I walked away, small under the streetlight maybe, but unbreakable. A week later, the scandal hit every news channel. Hayes Construction's CEO arrested for fraud. The images showed Desmond being led away in handcuffs, head down, the press flashing cameras like vultures circling a carcass. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just turned off the TV and sat in silence. For the first time, I wasn't part of his story anymore. He was part of mine, and only as a lesson. That night, Caleb called. "We're hosting a fundraiser for women's empowerment next month," he said. "They want you to be one of the speakers. Tell your story." "My story?" I laughed softly. "You think people want to hear that?" He paused. "They need to." So I said yes. The night of the event, I stood on stage under soft golden lights. Rows of women watched me, waiting. I took a deep breath and began. "I used to think being strong meant holding on," I said. "But sometimes strength means letting go, of pain, of guilt, of the need to be chosen. Because when you stop begging someone to love you, you finally have room to love yourself." There was silence at first, then applause, soft but growing. And somewhere deep inside, I felt it again. That same warmth I felt on stage, the same peace I'd once mistaken for weakness. Maybe karma isn't punishment. Maybe it's clarity. Because when the dust finally settles, it doesn't matter who hurt you, who left, or who fell. What matters is who you became when it was all over. And I had finally become someone I could be proud of. They say forgiveness doesn't change the past, it changes you. I used to roll my eyes when people said that, but now, standing on the balcony of my little apartment as the sun rose over Atlanta, I understood. Forgiving Desmond hadn't erased what he did. It had simply untied the last knot between us. And when the final thread broke, something inside me expanded, like my lungs finally remembered how to breathe again. I started seeing life differently after that. Colours looked brighter, food tasted better, music didn't make me sad anymore. It's strange how peace can sneak up on you quietly, one small breath at a time. Work at the theatre kept growing. After the success of our last play, Caleb asked me to co-direct a new project. It was about loss, resilience, and the strange beauty of second chances. The irony wasn't lost on me. During rehearsals, Caleb and I spent long hours discussing scripts, lighting, and timing. He was patient, meticulous, and had this way of making people feel safe. Some nights we'd stay late, talking long after everyone left, about life, mistakes, faith. He never asked about Desmond directly. He just listened whenever I brought it up, never judging, never interrupting. One evening, as we locked up, he said softly, "You know, pain doesn't vanish. It just learns where to live." I smiled. Maybe that's what healing is, teaching it how to stay without breaking you. He nodded. Exactly. That night, as I walked home, I realized I hadn't thought about Desmond all day, not once, and that realization felt better than any revenge ever could. A few weeks later, I got an unexpected email. It was from a women's organization that had seen my fundraiser speech online. They wanted to feature my story in their national campaign, Rise Again. At first, I hesitated. Exposing myself to the world again felt terrifying. But then I remembered something my mother once said. Your story might be the light someone else needs to find their way out. So I said yes. We filmed the segment in the theatre. They asked me to stand under the same spotlight where I had once performed and speak directly into the camera. What would you tell a woman who feels broken? The interviewer asked. I took a breath and said, I'd tell her that broken isn't the end. It's just a different shape of whole. You may never go back to who you were, but you can become someone stronger, kinder, and free. When it aired, messages poured in. Women from all over wrote to me, stories of betrayal, heartbreak, infertility, loss, and every message reminded me I wasn't alone. None of us were. One afternoon, while organising costumes backstage, I heard Caleb call my name. He was holding a small envelope. For you, he said. Inside was a photo, our entire theatre group, smiling after our last show. On the back, he'd written, for the woman who turned pain into art. I laughed, touched and speechless. Caleb, I said softly, you don't know what that means to me. He smiled. Maybe I do. There was something in his gaze that made my heart stutter. Not fireworks, not obsession, just peace. The kind of connection built on quiet understanding, not chaos. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was chasing love. I was letting it find me. Months passed. One morning, as I opened the theatre doors, I saw a little girl sitting on the steps. She couldn't have been more than 4, clutching a worn teddy bear. Her babysitter had stepped away for a minute. She looked up at me with big, curious eyes and asked, Are you the lady who talks on the stage? I smiled. Sometimes. She nodded thoughtfully. You talk nice. You don't sound sad. Her words pierced me in the gentlest way. Maybe that was the real measure of healing, not when you stop crying, but when even strangers can't hear the sadness in your voice anymore. That night, as I watched the sunset from the theatre balcony, Caleb joined me. He handed me a mug of coffee and said, We're lucky, you know. Not everyone gets to start over. I looked out at the skyline glowing gold. Starting over doesn't scare me anymore, I said, because now I know what I'm made of. He smiled. And what's that? Fire, I said. The kind that doesn't destroy, it warms. We stood there in silence, side by side, the city lights flickering below us. For once there was no rush, no fear, no ghosts from the past, just peace. And as the curtain of night fell, I whispered a quiet thank you to life, to pain, to love, to every version of me that refused to give up. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come in grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives softly, like dawn after a long dark night. And when it does, you don't fight it, you just let it in. It's strange how quiet life becomes when you stop fighting the past. There's no dramatic music, no thunderclap, no cinematic ending, just peace, steady, patient, and honest. A year had passed since the night everything fell apart. In that time, I'd built something new, something mine. The theatre had grown, the women's campaign had gone national, and I'd learned to speak my truth without fear of breaking. But the past has a way of finding you, even when you've stopped looking for it. One evening, after rehearsal, the front desk clerk handed me an envelope, no return address. Inside, a short letter written in shaky handwriting. Aisha, they sentenced me to 3 years. I've had a lot of time to think. If you ever read this, I just want you to know you were right about everything. I hope you're happy. You deserve that. Desmond. I read it twice, then I folded it neatly and slipped it into my journal, not out of sentiment but out of closure. There was a time when those words would have reopened wounds. Now they were just words. Proof that karma isn't about revenge, it's about reckoning. Later that week, I visited my parents. My father was pruning roses in the garden.
My mother was humming softly in the kitchen. The house looked the same, but everything inside me had changed. My father smiled when he saw me. "You look different," he said. "How so?" "Like someone who finally knows her own worth." I hugged him, and for a moment I felt like that broken girl at his dinner table again, except this time I knew she'd survived. After dinner, my mother brought out the old photo album. She flipped to a picture of me in my wedding dress, bright smile, hopeful eyes, standing beside the man I thought would love me forever. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the album gently and said, "She didn't know it then, but she was about to become someone stronger." My mother squeezed my hand. "She still is." A few weeks later, I stood on the theatre stage alone. The auditorium was empty, the seats dark and silent. It was the same place where I'd first rediscovered my voice. I looked out at the rows and whispered softly, "Thank you." For the pain that broke me, for the storm that rebuilt me, for the silence that taught me to listen. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was grateful. Grateful that the worst thing that ever happened to me became the reason I found myself again. Caleb walked in quietly behind me. "You're talking to ghosts again," he teased. "Maybe," I said, "but they listen better than most people." He smiled, stepping beside me. "The new play's ready. You want to read the first line?" I nodded, taking the script from his hand. The first line read, "This is not the end. This is where I begin." I smiled. I think I know how to deliver that one. That night, as I walked home through the quiet streets, I passed by a small bookstore window. A quote was painted on the glass in gold letters. "Sometimes the woman who walked through fire is not the same one who walks out, but she's finally free." I stopped and stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled, because that was me. When I got home, I poured a cup of tea, sat by the window, and opened my journal to the last page. I wrote, "I no longer wait for closure from anyone else. I give it to myself. Because I am not what happened to me. I am what I chose to become afterward." I closed the journal, turned off the light, and let the night wrap around me like a soft blanket. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted by what I'd lost. I felt guided by what I'd found. Peace, purpose, and the quiet kind of happiness that never needed anyone's permission. If you've ever been broken, remember, your story doesn't end with pain. It begins when you rise again. Tell me in the comments, what did this story make you feel? And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real stories that remind us it's never too late to start over.